Hi, I'm Cameron Jorgensen, Associate Professor of Christian Theology and Ethics at Campbell University Divinity School, and I have a question for you. Have you made some New Year's resolutions that are food-related? If so, way to go! You're not alone! But is it possible that you've also resolved to feed your mind and your soul a bit better as well? If so, I want to tell you about a resource that addresses both of these important goals at the same time. The newest issue of the journal, Review and Expositor, which is all about food. Let me tell you a story that helps to explain why, when I was given a chance to edit an issue of Review and Expositor, a journal dedicated to biblical and theological themes, I decided to tackle the theme of food. In 2012, something truly remarkable happened. I walked out of the North Carolina State Fair holding a blue ribbon, an engraved silver pie server, and a commemorative apron featuring the Pillsbury Doughboy. Why? Because my recipe for chai latte pie had won the Pillsbury Pie Championship. That is a day to remember. Well, since that day, I've reflected about why I entered the competition. Of course, there's the fun of baking, sampling all the tasty experiments, and there's the fun of creating something new and putting it out into the world and sharing it with others. And there's the thrill of competition, too. But it went so much deeper than that. I realized upon reflection that I became involved in competitive cooking at the state fair because I was a recent transplant to North Carolina, and I wanted a seat at the table in my new home state. And after all, creating food involves the pursuit of excellence in community, testing and refining and sharing attempts to nourish and delight. And what I submitted that day was more than a pie. It was a fellowship offering laid on a gingham altar. I share that story because it speaks to something important. Food is complicated. It's never just sustenance. It's loaded with meaning. Think about it. Food is God's first gift to humanity in the garden. Food is tied up in the images of what heaven is like. Food is bound up in every ecological crisis that we currently face. Food is woven into the very fabric of our worship. And food is even tied to the national and religious and regional and family identities that all of us bear. And for that very reason, food involves all the complexity and all the brokenness that people bring with them to the table. As a theologian, I'm drawn to reflect on food for all of those reasons. Somehow, food links an eclectic range of issues, from the glorious to the tragic. And we have assembled a smorgasbord of essays in this fall 2020 issue of Review and Expositor. And I'm proud to say, this may be the only academic journal that contains 3 recipes. That's something you can sink your teeth into. To give you a sense of what's in this issue, I'll offer a brief snapshot of each essay, and then I'll let you know how you can access the collection. In fact, at the end of the video, I'll even share the recipe for chai latte pie. Here we go! In Mark Biddle's essay, A Word About, A Call to Keep Kosher Today, we hear a stirring reminder that foodways have always been part of living in covenant with God. Given the layered challenges involved in eating in the 21st century, Biddle asks what keeping kosher might look like in our context today. Scott H. Moore offers a timely word for a world transformed by COVID-19. His article, Rethinking Food, Fortune and Misfortune, Reading Wendell Berry in a Time of Pandemic, reminds us of the maxim, good fortune corrupts, bad fortune instructs. In conversation with Wendell Berry, Moore helps us to consider how our current misfortunes might instruct us about food, sustainability, and human flourishing. Next, according to David W. Pretty, there is an often missing ingredient in our lives and our worship: penitence. In Eating with Penitence, an essay on the local church eating responsibly, Pretty exhorts the reader to rediscover how penitence might prevent the church from being satisfied with busyness or empty activism. Correcting what traditionally has been a blind spot for Baptists, Allison Collier addresses the spiritual discipline of fasting and its value for corporate spiritual formation. Her article, Fasting, A Congregational Call for Baptists to Reclaim a Neglected Discipline, offers biblical and historical backgrounds on the discipline, as well as practical suggestions for congregations that seek to explore this ancient path. Christopher D. Walk offers a surprising claim in his essay, The Virtuous Act of Feasting as a Cure for Gluttony. While conventional wisdom suggests that the best cure for gluttony is fasting, Walk demonstrates that feasting is just as important for the task. This is good news indeed. My own contribution to the conversation is the essay, The Pleasures of Food and the Good Life. Rejecting the notion that faith is a joyless business with no room for bodily pleasure, I suggest that the Christian tradition is appropriately cautious about the consequences of disordered desire while boldly affirming the goodness of God's creation. Pleasure, then, can play a positive role in spiritual formation, and that even humble onions and coffee mugs can serve as implements of worship. Having considered the pleasures of food, we then turn to a pair of articles that lead us to re-encounter bread. The first, by John Inscore Essick, is entitled Preaching from Ground to Table, Reflections on an Eastertide Sermon for Port Royal Baptist Church. It reflects on an unusual sermon that ponders the bread consumed in communion. Inscore Essick leads us to pay closer attention to the food that's consumed and the gifts that have been received. And there's a recipe included. The second essay that directs our attention toward bread is Word and Bread, a theological recipe for body and mind. Kendall Vanderslice braids together theological argumentation and a recipe for no-knead bread, demonstrating that baking represents embodied knowledge, a kind of knowing that offers profound theological possibilities. The conversation then turns to the public and communal dimensions of food. Jacqueline Lewis Albin, a physician and professor of medicine, provides wise counsel about the connections between food, faith, and health. In her essay, Eat to Live, a physician's perspective on the powerful role of food in a faithful life. In it, we discover how churches can offer a fuller picture of wholeness by addressing the role of food in faith and in health. Cindy Bolden, a self-described community minister who has adopted the restaurants and pubs of downtown Raleigh as her parish, reflects on the story of Jesus' encounter with the woman at the well in her essay Hospitality at Community Wells, the life-giving waters of John 4:7-15. She reflects on the boundary-crossing nature of that conversation and its implications for our engagement with the community. Alarmed by the growing problem of food insecurity on the African continent, Jackson Adama offers a theological response in his essay, Food Insecurity, Eucharist and Community, reading Jean-Marc Ella's Shade Tree Theology in light of Balthazar's Ecclesiology. Here, Adama sets two great Catholic theologians in dialogue, one a liberation theologian, the other a Eucharistically focused conservative. Adama discovers surprising points of convergence that help to model ways to address food insecurity while remaining theologically robust. Now turning to Scripture, we discover a fascinating range of moments when food played a crucial role. For instance, Kenneth A. Vandegrift explores the implications of traditions surrounding the mysterious figure of Melchizedek in his essay Melchizedek and the Eucharist, rediscovering Eucharistic interpretations of the bread and wine in Genesis 14. Despite the complexity, Vandegrift suggests that the figure of Melchizedek is important for our understanding of Christ and the bread offered at the Lord's table. Christy Cobb also takes us to the Lord's table, specifically to the Last Supper. In her essay Preparing and Sharing the Table, The Invisibility of Women and Enslaved Domestic Workers in Luke's Last Supper, Cobb re-narrates the Last Supper in order to fill in details that are often overlooked, namely the role of women and the enslaved in preparing the sacred meal. David A. Steinbrenner takes us to the Corinthian church and its lackluster performance of the Eucharist in his essay The Lord's Supper, When Food and Dining Become Determinative in 1 Corinthians 11, verses 17-24. Steinbrenner offers perceptive analysis of what went wrong at the table in Corinth and what consequences resulted. Finally, Eric J. Gilchrist serves up Dinner in Paradise, the fruit of the tree of life in the New Jerusalem. Here we encounter the tree of life in Revelation chapter 22, a powerful symbol of abundance and provision, and a reminder of God's good intentions for humanity. There's a time-honored practice of sharing recipes, often by way of 3x5 cards, tattered and stained with use. And at its core, that practice is an exercise in sharing wisdom. And that image captures well the intent of this collection. Each article is a labor of love, a reflection of the gifts, skills, and quirks of the ones who made them, shared as a token of fellowship and goodwill. So we invite you to take and read, and bake, and make progress in your resolutions regarding feeding body and mind and spirit. If you're interested in exploring the collection and you happen to be connected to a university, accessing the articles is as easy as clicking the link below or searching your institution's library for the authors' names or titles just mentioned. You'll be able to download a PDF of any of the essays for free. But if you're not connected to a university and you would like a bound copy, you can call 1-800-818-7243. Simply request Volume 117, Issue 4, November 2020, on the theme of food. Bon appetit!